Welcome to the Revenue Room. This is the podcast for CEOs and CXOs leading media, events, and data businesses through a period of genuine disruption. Every episode, we sit down with someone who has been in the room where the hard calls get made and ask them what they're seeing, what they're building, and what they're doing differently. So today, I'm thrilled to introduce today's guest, Jay Lauf. Jay Lauf is the co-founder of Charter, a media and research company focused on the future of work and on building new frameworks so people and organizations thrive. He leads Charter's commercial strategy, sponsorship partnerships, and event programming, including the Charter Workplace Summit. In June 2025, Charter was acquired by the San Francisco Standard. Before Charter, Jay co-founded Quartz as its founding publisher in 2012, grew it to more than $30 million in annual revenue with offices and events spanning 4 continents, and led its sale to Usabase in 2018. Before that, he led The Atlantic's revitalization as publisher, delivering its first profit in decades. Ad Age called the result an ultra-modern, multi-platform juggernaut. He started his publishing career at Wired, rising from advertising director to publisher over 7 years during and after the dot-com collapse. Along the way, he was named Adweek's Publisher of the Year and Ad Age Publishing Executive of the Year. He also advises and invests in media and technology companies, including ScrollStack, Inquire.ai, and Atlas Obscura. It's rare to get all of this in one guest. Jay is a serial entrepreneur who has built and sold 2 companies. His current business is focused squarely on one of the most discussed topics among our membership today: how organizations need to be redesigned and how talent requirements are shifting in the age of AI. And he's a seasoned operator who has spent decades in the trenches of media, events, data, and professional networks. And that squarely sits in the Revenue Room's wheelhouse. For our audience, that combination is about as relevant as it gets. So Jay, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Heather. Delighted to be here. Thanks for having me on.
Excellent. Well, we've got a ton of questions. I've been super excited for this podcast, so let's dive right in. So you've now built and exited 2 media companies from scratch. When you look back at those 2 experiences, what's the one thing you believed about building a media business at, let's say, Quartz, that turned out to be wrong by the time you were building Charter?
Yeah, that's an interesting question. Probably an easy one to answer, too. I think the thing that we thought at Quartz and almost religiously was that scale was the game. Scaling audience and along with it being able to scale ad revenue. So that combo just seemed to be have an infinite amount of headroom. You know, you have to remember Quartz was launched in 2012, and this is a year when mobile consumption was outstripping desktop consumption for the first time. Same thing with social media. Social media was driving more traffic to websites than Google searches by that stage. And our belief, firmly held, was that if you stripped all the friction out of finding and discovering content, you could build big audiences and capitalize on that through ad revenue. And that really proved to be true and worked really well up through that run, to your point, to drive to 30 million in revenue. What I think I've learned what was wrong about that is that has a, pick your metaphor, there's a ceiling on that. If you're racing toward, ad revenue at all costs as the main and maybe even only driver of revenue, you're going to run into a ceiling, or even frankly nose first into a wall at some point, which has become really clear today. Conditions changed a lot and continue to change a lot, but it'll bring me back to, I think, some of the other stuff that we'll discuss. But that's the main thing I learned, is that is a dangerous place to put all your chips.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. It is definitely a wildly different world, today than it was also back in 2012. So, just so much has changed. What, between Charter and Quartz, you did something that most operators have a real hard time doing. You took a deliberate year off. What broke loose in that year that shaped how you built Charter differently?
Yeah, it's as you say, it was a very deliberate year off, and I had no trouble doing it. Frankly, I'd worked on startups and turnarounds for 30 years, and I always think about that. I never really was on a one of the ways I phrase it very often is I was never like at ESPN in its heyday, taking clients to the Super Bowl and watching money roll in, right? Like every day was existential for me for 30 plus years. So by the time we sold Quartz, I realized I needed some time off, time to all the things that you would do with that, to recharge, to rest, to quiet my mind. So that's what I was able to do, is really just quiet my brain, because when you're running, companies and building companies, you know how it is. All of us know how that is. It's just constant context switching and inputs and outputs all day long. And your mind, I think if you're not careful, can become a jumble. So the first thing I did was quieted my mind. And I would say it allowed me to then really reflect on very deeply what I'll call, and I'm gonna use the phrase, first principles here, knowing full well that probably doesn't neatly apply to media businesses very often. And I think that the term and the idea get bastardized a little bit, but I think it's apropos, is to really think about, like, going back to, what's the irreducible truth in the foundation of a media business that you need to just stick to and adhere to if you're going to rebuild. And where I ended up is it's not the means of production, it's not distribution. Those are things that are constantly changing and evolving, and at one point may have felt like big advantages, certainly in the old days of the printing press and so on. But at the end of the day, the irreducible truth is that human attention is finite. It's just physically finite. You can't get beyond that. Let's call it 16 hours in a day. And so that the game really, can get distilled down to, how do you capture meaningful, not only amounts of, but meaningful, uh, highly valuable bits of that time and attention. Because if you can do that, if you can attract the attention and the considered and concentrated attention of your audience, I think all of the revenue opportunities begin to flow from that. It's a very simple concept. It's one that I probably intrinsically understood, but in all of the noise and white noise of doing battle every day, it got lost. And so that was the sort of the revelation that helped me understand, as we were launching Charter, what I would and would not sign up for, what I did and did not want to do in terms of helping us build build the business model for it.
So if I were to just like recap that, basically what you're saying is, it's, as human beings, it's, there's only X amount of attention you can get. And the goal of the, if you can get a small piece of that, but on a consistent basis as a media brand, you've, I won't say won the game, but that is a big piece of the success puzzle.
Correct. And I think it's less about the size and amount of it, although obviously the more the better, I do believe. But I think it's the quality of that. Is it concentrated, effective attention versus, you get distracted attention on TikTok. But if somebody's going to go deep with you and devote some of their attention, whatever it is, every day, every week, every month, to a thing that is a necessity for them, um,
Hmm.
that is the foundation for a sustainable business, in my opinion.
Yep. I used to always say, our job, I used to have a manufacturing media brand that connected with technology. Um, it was, we have to help our audience do their jobs better, faster, with less risk every day. Could
Yes.
be,
Yeah.
that was the equation. And I don't think that's changed, by the way. People want you to help them be better, whether it's them as an individual leader, them and their teams, or, the company as a whole. And in fact, if you could do all three, that I think is also really part of the value equation.
Couldn't agree more. And it just makes you essential. I mean, indispensability
Hmm.
is a word that I find myself using over and over and over again in this kind of context. It's like you need to become indispensable to somebody, in order to, to some slice of the audience, in order to be successful.
Absolutely, absolutely. So, Charter was founded on the premise that leaders need a new playbook for how organizations actually work. And I can tell you from our membership, Revenue CXO, this issue of organization, especially today, is probably the top challenge they're dealing with. So, and of course, 4 years ago, you had no idea, none of us knew what AI was going to be doing. So now, 4 years in, now inside the San Francisco Standard, where do you see the biggest gap between what leaders say they want to build and what they're actually doing inside their companies?
Mm. Yeah, I think there's sort of two dimensions to that. One is an AI dimension, and one is sort of a more overarching dimension that I hear a lot about. Like I hear over and over again leaders talking about sustainable high performance. Like what we want to do here is ensure that we're set up for sustainable high performance, right? That phrase is used over and over again. Um, and then I think part of what I'm going to say applies also to AI, less AI adoption, but it's AI transformation is the other thing. We want to transform our
Hmm.
business through AI. And I think, so that's one thing. It's nice to say those things, but I think the things that they're not really thinking about doing is setting the company up structurally for both of those things to happen. And by that, I mean, what are the policies, the norms, the communication structures within the company that allow for those two things? So on the sustainable high performance piece of it, focusing on the word sustainable, one of the things that creates sustainable high performance is attending to the um, to the wellness writ large of your employees, the effectiveness, I guess, is the word I'm looking for, of your employees. And part of that effectiveness is their ability to take risks, to try new things, to fail, to identify those points of failure and breakage in a strategy, and communicate those through an effective chain that allows for the shifting of either strategy or tactics to allow you to continue that high performance. And I think there's so many points of breakdown in organizations. There's a lack of I think there's a lot of lip service given to culture,
Mm.
but it feels like a soft, squishy notion to a lot of leaders, and it really isn't, because a lot of what I was talking about there is cultural, right? Is there the psychological safety to be someone who raises their hand and says, "Hey, why are we doing this when maybe we should be doing that?" without fear of being either shouted down or ostracized inside the company. Um, what are the communications norms? We have very strict ones at Charter that work incredibly well, which are combinations of, regular team meetings where we're communicating verbally, but also,
Hmm.
making sure that we're memorializing decisions and ideas and data in written communication using Notion or whatever it is on a regular basis. So I think there's a lot of, again, we want this, but you're not building the internal structure. And I think the same applies for AI. Some of what I just said applies to AI, psychological safety, the ability to, give people permission to test and fail and learn and report in all of that is critical. But I also think it's structural. So one of the things that, if we're talking about, we're looking for AI transformation, you've got, I think the stat that I've recently seen is something like 93% of investment in AI is in the tools, 7% is in training.
Mm.
That's not setting you up for sustainable high performance. That's not actual transformation. That's just
Mm-mm.
importing a bunch of tools and hoping people figure out how to use them. So I think that's where those are the things I'm hearing the most and the gaps that I see the most.
Does that present an opportunity just even on the, because you're, in terms of what you offer from a service line, and I'm actually going to get into the next question. Does that present an opportunity for charter at all in terms of the training?
Yeah, I think it does. And actually, if we're going to talk a little bit about the services piece of our business, yes, I think it does create an opportunity, not only for us, but there are a lot of companies that we work with who are part of our sponsor roster who are looking to address some of those issues, whether it's a culture amp or a valence or companies like that. But yeah, I think it presents a real opportunity for us as well, because in the early going, and this maybe leads you to your next question, the early going services wasn't necessarily on the drawing board for us, but we kind of got pulled by the lapels by our subscribers saying, "Hey, I really love what I'm reading. I love the ideas that you have. Can you come in and help us, implement? Can you run a workshop? Can you talk us through some of this?" And so that kind of organically developed at some
Mm.
point.
Well, we have one of our CEO members of Revenue and CXO. They what they found, and I think it's just such a roller coaster, is, and they do trading in data. is that when AI came in, and this kind of really supports that stat you wrote, everyone was buying the tools thinking they could just learn and do it. So like, oh, I don't need training. Like, we don't need you anymore. I think now, like, they've got into it and they're like, oh my God. Like, because it's one, they've probably overpurchased on the tools. Two, they have no idea like how much they've opened up their data to just with no governance. And then three,
Exposure, yeah.
we're even just like, okay, like I can't even like, did we put that in ChatGPT as an agent, or is it in Claude, or are we using CoWork for it, or we're like, where is all of this stuff we're
Yeah,
doing?
right, right.
It's like the Wild West. So I think there's a great opportunity from a consulting slash research slash learning and development standpoint.
Yeah, no, I don't disagree. I think all of what you just said is true, including the opportunity piece of it. Yeah.
So, well, that leads me to this question, which is Charter Pro members, you have a premium offering you sell to your audience, are often senior leaders, basically the same people who attend your events or bring in advisory work. So, like, walk me through or walk the audience through how Charter thinks about serving that one leader on two different days. The Tuesday morning where they need a practical tool to solve a problem right now, versus the moment, for example, where they may need a strategic framework for, where their function is headed over the next 2 to 3 years.
Yeah, really, I think they're part and parcel of the same thing, right? Like all of those day to day, all the Tuesdays roll up to a multi-year strategy eventually, right? It's how are you executing, how are you advancing what the strategy is, and I think there's sort of twofold. We see our role as like trying to help. One, we see ourselves as sense makers is one of the phrases we used a lot. People are drowning in information. And so one of the things that I hope and think we built is enough trust among our community that they can trust us to sift through and distill the sort of most rigorous and interesting academic research married with real world case studies to try to surface the best actionable ideas in both those tranches. One is trying to help you see around corners. I think 3 years out is ambitious at this stage. I think you can start thinking 2 years out, on most of the things that we would try to address. But we try to surface that work through both our reporting that is in our email newsletter and our freely available newsletter, and then things like our events, our summits. We do 3 different summits a year. We have one on AI that's in Q1, employer brand, which is in June, and then our upcoming Charter Workplace Summit on October 21st will be our 6th annual kind of comprehensive look at the future of work. So those mechanisms serve to help you think big picture about where things are headed. Charter Pro is the vehicle that then gets a little bit closer to the ground in terms of creating actionable um, products and vehicles and totems for, how do you take this research and bridge it into practice? And so that's where we try to serve. I think at the end of the day, it's all rolling up into a strategy and a long-term goal. But as I was just saying, and you, I'm sure would agree, it's like those goals are only achieved through the shorter term incremental strategic things that you're doing. But we get a lot of that question, like, what do I actually do about it? And so one of the gaps we're trying to fill in this space is again, we use the phrase bridging research to practice all the time. Like, here's a concrete practical thing you can begin doing now to start marching toward this idea that you have bought into, as an example.
Hmm.
And that's what the Charter Pro newsletter is really designed to be, and the advisory piece of that.
Terrific. And so if I were to look at your revenue universe, it's advertising.
Mhm.
Do you do demand gen?
We have not deeply and not directly, but we have a demand gen vendor that we work with that, yes, we can. That's a product that we
Okay.
can offer.
You have obviously event revenue, both attendance and sponsorship.
Correct?
You've got a subscription model.
Yes. Mhm.
So you're monetizing the audience, not only by event attendance, but by your subscriptions. And it sounds like you have advisory and learning and development type of revenue. Am I missing anything?
No, those are the primary levers, and I think the one thing that I would say is, we launched with all 3 of those revenue streams versus, you know, picking one, and there's a cost to that in terms of institutional distraction and an actual hard cost. So I think what
Yeah.
we've learned is we're more opportunistic right now about the advisory piece of that, the services piece of that business. I think that's a down the road tranche that we can really lean into and be more aggressive about, pushing to the market. Right now, we let the market pull us on those. And when there's an engagement that both we can feel like we can execute well on and there's enough revenue for, then we'll do it. But it's not a thing that we're actually promoting heavily. Really, the two main sources of revenue for us are, and I say sponsorship versus advertising deliberately. We do very little to no display advertising. It's
Hmm.
all content sponsorships, whether that's at an event or in the newsletter, and then pro memberships. To your point.
Got it. Okay. That's interesting. Do you see which of those do you see as the big growth? Well, I don't know if you have a hockey stick effect, but like of the sponsorships, digital versus in person. What do you see as the versus the subscriptions? Which ones? Where do you see the growth coming from?
Yeah, it's such an interesting question. I think this will be interesting and maybe helpful to those of you, your audience who are kind of in my boat, which is a young, startup slash, high growth company. There's no question that the faster tranche to bigger dollars is in sponsorship versus subscription revenue. It's just a slower build, smaller amounts. And so, for the first part of our existence, the bulk of the revenue comes in through sponsorships. The long-term strategy and goal, however, is recurring revenue,
Hmm.
and driving more of that membership revenue over time. So we're on a good steady path to that. And this year, investing a little bit more heavily in it. So all to say that in my mind's eye, if we get this right, I'm sitting here 5 years from now, and the bulk of the revenue will come from membership, and the sponsorship revenue will be secondary. Currently, it's the inverse of that for
Hmm.
the first five years, and you know, increasingly uh, diminished percentage is sponsorship because the other is growing. It's just
Yeah.
at the beginning it was literally all sponsorship. In terms of event versus media, it's it's kind of neck and neck, but the thing I'll say about events is that they anchor, some of the bigger media buys as well, right? It's one of our models has been in order to get access even to some of our, very high value, low inventory, or high demand event products, which have limitations, right? Built-in inventory limitations. We're creating minimum spend thresholds in order to get access to those, and some of those are fulfilled through media, for example. Or somebody, a lot of companies want to extend an event sponsorship beyond the day of, right? And one of the ways to do that is through media buys. So this is nothing new. I think a lot of brands out there are doing this, but I'd say it's about a 50-50 split when you look at the revenue line at the end of the year, but the importance of events is pretty significant.
Yeah, that's yeah, I always say this and I kick myself when I say it, but because it's such a terrible terminology to use, or maybe I'll just say it's a cat with 9 lives. Events, no matter what comes their way, the black swan event of COVID, everyone thought live events were done for, which that was a stupid thing to say. But they have been flying. Like it is, they just keep growing. And AI now has actually really pushed the value of the in-person experience because it's where you actually get the most trustworthy content and interaction. So, we just did a survey, and for a lot of the respondents, events is a big, continues to be a big growth leader. So in any case, go events.
Yeah.
Um,
Yes. Yeah, exactly. Not for the faint of heart, by the way, but
no,
um,
No, that's my other thing I always say. Everyone says, "Oh, let me launch an event," let me be a media company. Yeah, it's very difficult. So,
yes, that's right.
all right. So, at Charter's Leading with AI Summit earlier this year, you surfaced a striking data point. And again, this is also something I'm seeing in our universe, which is nearly half the CEOs fear losing their jobs if they do not get the AI strategy right. Yet most senior executives are using AI less than an hour a week, or they're not truly understanding it and they're delegating to their teams to do it. And it's a real big disconnect. Has this changed? And like, do you have more to say about this? Like, in terms of what you're seeing?
Yeah, I don't have a ton to say about it because I think it is changing slowly. Like I've been privy to a couple of instances where whether it's there's some consulting firms. There's a company called Women Defining AI that focuses very specifically on women in not, actually at all tiers, but
Mm,
they've done some executive programs as well, which is hands-on learning. And the over and over again, what I hear is how revelatory it is for C-suite executives. They're like, oh, now I finally get it, and it can be dangerous because they go zipping back to the office and start saying like now they're going to dictate how we're building agents and what we're going to do with them. But I think that that's being a little bit facetious, but um, I think we're going to see. I don't think the data's in yet, but I bet you 6 months from now, by the end of the year, you're going to see a lot more hands-on experimentation and training for C-suite executives, because that number goes up even higher in 2020. So the stat that we cited was from Nicholas Bloom at Stanford Business School, and it was something like 50% of executives, CEOs, are fearful of losing their jobs if they don't get AI strategy right by 2026. That number goes up to 74% are fearful of losing their job if they don't get the strategy right by 2027.
hmm
So I think you're going to see a lot more activity. And I listen. I think it's not it's an easy thing to understand why the current condition exists, and it's a hard thing to square. Which is, I think CEOs by necessity, but also by skill set, are really incredible delegators. You have to be. You can't do
mm.
every single thing yourself. You have to identify great talent and trust it to execute. And so I think you get this. I know, having been a CEO, like, you can get into this sort of muscle memory of, okay, I understand just enough, and I understand sort of the strategy here, and let someone else go do. But I think with this particular technology, you need to be you need to be doing as well as understanding. I think, or
A
I think,
100%.
yeah, yeah,
I even like, again, I have a small company, but as a CEO, like, I'm so nervous about things happening with AI that my team's doing, and then I'm like, well, and I hate use. What if you get hit by a bus? Like, I'm screwed.
yeah.
Like, it's really, it's very all of this vibe coding. It's very much in that one human being versus buying a software platform. Oh, the person leaves. I can just hire someone else who knows HubSpot. It's a very different scenario.
Absolutely. And I don't think you need to go deep, 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 but you have to have a little bit of experience with it to understand like how to discern, what's the right strategic decision from somebody who reports to you. Like, if you haven't like had some hands-on experience, you're really ceding agency to those folks. And I think that's where the fear comes in.
Yeah,
Is like, I came up through the sales ranks. So it was very intuitive for me to be able to assess if I've got a sales leader on my team coming to me and saying, "Hey, we're going to go do XYZ." I might immediately say, "No, what are you talking about?"
right.
Because I've done it before. Or, yes, like, go run with that. And I think that's the hard thing to square for CEOs. But I think with AI, it's just too important and too rapidly changing to just hope that you don't need to learn it. I think you need to learn it.
Absolutely. And I think there's one other point about that, just with you, because I came up through the sales ranks as well. So I totally like, if you know it, you know it. Like, that's your function, it's your expertise. And then you're like, oh, well, the CDO knows all the data stuff. But AI is so pervasive across the organ, everything. That's
Exactly.
why really it's got to be on the CEO agenda. So,
Totally agree.
all right. So, you talk about, you made a public case that the real opportunity with AI is not more output per hour, but fewer hours worked. That is a hard argument to make to a board that wants margin expansion. So walk us through how you frame that for a CEO who's under earnings pressure, right?
Yeah, it's a hard case. Yeah, it's a hard case for me to make to colleagues sometimes. Um, Listen, I just want to. I'll preview what I'm about to say by saying, like, I fully recognize that I wouldn't be where I am in my career without a lot of hours, inordinate amounts of hours, and really stretching myself. I think it's unavoidable if you're going to build something, and if you just listen, if you aspire to really get into the highest echelons of leadership, you're going to have to sacrifice. I just don't think there's a way around that. But not everybody, I think the thing we have to recognize is not everybody aspires to do that. They have other things that they value in life. But I guess what I would say to the board is, I was struck by I think it's a 2014 or 2015 Stanford study years ago, because it really spoke to me, which uh, it was an in-depth study, longitudinal study that showed basically that human beings can do 50 to 55 hour, 50 hour work weeks at maximum, sort of sustainably. And you can stretch up into the 65, 70 hour work week for maybe a month, 6 weeks at a time. If you're trying to get a new product out the door, you've got a new project that's deadline driven, you can do it for bursts. But at a certain point, the data literally is that after that, every hour that you spend more than 50 hours a week, if you've gone through that 4-week gauntlet, is valueless. Somebody who's working 70 hours was as productive, demonstrably productive, as somebody who was working 50 hours. So where that leads, so obviously what they're driving at there is that burnout can be real, and it creates diminishing returns. And what starts to happen over time is it eats into the 50 hours worth of productivity. You start putting out 43 hours of productivity if you're doing 70 hours all the time. And I experienced this firsthand as a leader. One of the reasons I took a sabbatical is I was doing 70-hour, 65-hour work weeks every single week for 20 plus years, every week. I was clinically burned out by the time we sold Quartz to Usabase. When I look back on it now, and I'm not afraid to sort of admit that. And so if you believe, which I do, that particularly in knowledge industries like we are in, that your people are the number one or two lever for value creation inside your company, which I do, if you recognize that the cost of replacing somebody is 1.5 to 2 times their salary, which is what most data will tell you, and you acknowledge the fact that burnout leads to much, much higher rates of attrition, then so you've got attrition, you've got lack of effectiveness, you have cultural malaise, and productivity just sinks. So if you want to avoid all of that, my thinking is you've got an opportunity with AI to claw that back a little bit. And so these are theoretical, but I think directionally not far off. If, let's say, the productivity gains from AI can lead to about 15% productivity gains, which is what some of the prognosticators are saying, it might even be more than that. But let's say you get 15% more productivity out of a team with AI than you would. The average productivity gains year over year anywhere in the U.S. economy are 2%. So 15% is like a decade worth of productivity. And if what we do is just absorb all of that and try to add on to that, we miss an opportunity to at least just this. Why do we not consider this? Give people 5% of their time back. You still end up with whatever that is, 9 to 10% productivity growth, double, triple, quadruple what you could normally expect. But if you give a 50-hour person, 2.5 hours a week back, may not seem like a lot, but that's 2 more trips to the gym that you get to do, a ball game or a recital that you get to go visit your kids, have dinner with your wife, which I never did for 20 some odd years of commuting. What you end up with is a happier, more engaged, more productive employee. And so as a practical matter, I don't see why we don't do this. What I fear and what I worry is every time technology is supposed to unshackle us and create this freedom, it does just the opposite. It just sucks in deeper. I think this one has a chance to be different, and I just hope people will think about it differently.
So, tell me what you're doing at Charter with that. That's a really great mindset and opinion to have. What are there things you're doing at Charter with your team, giving the 2 hours back, for example, and how are you how are you operationalizing that?
Yeah. Yeah. I think, first of all, at Charter, I think we've always had strictures around people's time. So we do things, for example, like no meeting Fridays. We have no internal meetings on Fridays. I'm in the sales side of things, so I have external meetings, but there are 0 internal meetings on Fridays so that people can get heads down work done at their own pace. Nobody's policing you. So if you need to run an errand, you want to sleep in on Friday, just get your work done. So one of our big mantras is measuring outcomes over hours is another thing. We do user manuals, which is basically maybe what that sounds like. And a lot of people do this Silicon Valley thing. It's like when a new employee comes on, I hand them my user manual. Like, here's my biorhythm. I'm really great at I'm energetic in the morning. I can solve difficult problems in the mornings. Let's do rote meetings in the afternoons. I am
Mm.
on Slack starting usually at 7 a.m., but I'm not going to look, excuse me, I'm online and working from 7 a.m. I'm not going to look at Slack till 9, so don't bother. And then they can give, there are, there are some guardrails on all of this, but even just understanding everybody's sort of life rhythm a little bit allows for flexibility. Number one. Number two, um, I think we're using and assessing where AI can make us more efficient, which doesn't necessarily layer on more work. It maybe just means that you're using your 40-hour work week, which is what we have, differently. A couple of examples is, AI is really helping our journalists speed up their research processes. And rather than asking them to like pump out more articles as a result of that, it's just pump out better articles. Like then take the time that you had been spending on the research to hone the writing, to make sure it's incisive, to make sure it's valuable. I have a business development person on my team who, prior to these tools, I think she's using, it's like Apollo, Hunter, Wizza are some of the tools that she's using to find, you see a new prospect in a competitive newsletter, and then to find the right person, their contact info, like literally could be hours and hours of Googling and LinkedIn research all gets, you know, really just builds into is automated by AI. That frees her up to do just smarter, more tailored outreach versus necessary. I'm not asking her to like extend. Oh wow, this is great. Let's extend the hours, by 2 more hours a day and get more out of it. She's getting more out of it because of the tool. So I think
Hmm.
it's recognizing that the tool can be that the tool can make somebody more efficient and maybe improve some of the quality of the work versus just adding more time on. Um, so I don't know if that answers the question,
No,
but
totally. I mean, one, I love this user manual construct. That's because it is so important. Because and I'll just you were saying you and I probably are very alike in this. Like I'm very on in the morning. Like my brain is super sharp. I wake up at 4 a.m. I'm at the gym. Da 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 da. I'm like. I have work. I used to have a recorder. I'm like, can this go in the shower so I can like record my thoughts? And then by 2, I'm like petering out.
yeah,
And
yeah,
and my brain isn't working as well. I start getting a little more frustrated. I can't multitask. And so it's like if someone knew that about me, they would probably not schedule meetings at 3 o'clock because they're not going to get the best out of me. But I think also for me to understand, I have a really wonderful operations director. She's not a morning person. While I'm slacking her,
yeah,
So hey, I just love that
yeah.
concept.
It is. It's you know, just going back to your question though. You say, what are we doing concretely about it? I will say we haven't. So I think we already had a lot of really great hygiene around being respectful of people's time. But a place I could imagine us doing it, we haven't codified this yet. Is we also do mental health days periodically, where the whole company, gets a Friday off, quarterly, something like that. It's not weekly, but it's like quarterly. I could imagine that being, we ratchet that up and maybe we do 2 more of those a year
Hmm.
kind of
Hmm.
thing. AI is allowing us to do it and we see the value of it. People come like charging in on Monday, ready to storm the forts because they've been restored over a 3-day weekend. It's almost palpable.
Yep. No, for sure. And then the other thing I thought, which is really hard for some executives to do, but I think you're so spot on with this, which is you're giving your tools. Let's just use the salesperson example, who now researching prospects has gotten much better and actually more personalized. Like you're having a lot more information because you have this. Let that work instead of saying, okay, now you're spending less on that. Now you can also do this. And
Right.
that's not the way to look at it. Like, I'm going to get more out of this person because their time. No, I'm going to actually make the quality of their work better.
Correct. Right. Exactly. Because we all see this. We're all triaging and stretched so thinly. I often say, like, if you aspire to be an A, if you're somebody like that, and you're doing like, B work all day long, it's very unsatisfying.
No, totally. I get it. I get it. And it happens a lot with like we're a bootstrap startup and we're grappling with a lot of that right now too. So, all right, let's move into another, you know, discussion, which everyone talks about this headless organization, which it totally freaks me out.
Yeah.
Like I feel like it's that story. What was it? The Sleepy Hollow, you know?
Yeah.
But let's talk about what a headless organization means for the listeners. And how do you like what does this look like to you? Like, do we really think we could have like a function in the business where actually it's just AI agents, you know? But I don't know. I would love some more clarity about this as well.
Yeah, I don't. And I should caveat all of this by saying, as I'm one of three co-founders of Charter and I'm the commercial lead. So there are people on my team who are far more steeped in the research and all of this than I, who are kind of the experts than I. But at least in the conversations that I am privy to and just by my own, intuition, I think the idea of like a headless organization is sort of nonsense. I think maybe what the leadership does changes. One of the threads that I hear us studying a lot is the skill set of a manager in managing people versus managing AI agents. Those are two different skill sets, right? So I could imagine a different looking org chart that maybe does require slightly fewer managers on the coordination side of that skill set. So a lot of it is coordination and communication that can be streamlined by AI is part of a manager's job right now. So maybe there is a smaller group of people who handled that piece of it, the coordination piece of it. But it frees up the other layer of managers to, I think, coach and mentor, which is a critical piece of any kind of leadership. And sometimes you get like that. That was always my superpower as a leader that I think helped me, ascend over the years. I was really good at, I think, mentoring, coaching, understanding what each individual needed or was capable of, and trying to get the best out of them. I would get bogged down in the communication paperwork. That side of it was just drudgery for me, and I wasn't good at it. And so that was a time suck and a mental, drain and all the rest of it. And I think, maybe it's less, Ichabod Crane headless and it's two-headed. Like what's the mythology on that? There's a two-headed monster somewhere. You've got people in, the middle management tranches who are, again, in a more streamlined fashion, managing things AI is good at. And another tranche that is focused more on the human element is intuitively where my brain goes.
Yeah, yeah. Well, we're running out of time, so I did want to get this last question in to give a little guidance to our audience. You've had a career as an entrepreneur, and you lived that journey, including just hearing me talk about 20 years of just relentless 70-hour weeks. You're like, yeah. And Charter is your second successful exit. But for the operators in our audience who are building businesses they may want to sell one day, what is the one thing about positioning a media or an information company for acquisition that most founders underestimate?
Wow, I kind of know that one right away because I saw us with Quartz. I saw us headed this way, and I like to give myself a little bit of credit for veering us away from the mistake or the blind spot. Is I think you underestimate the subjective, and the subjective being buyers can fall in love with two things that are that are not on a spreadsheet, right? Like we can look at the TAM, we can look at, year over year revenue growth and profit margins, and all of that does matter. But the things that have driven the sales that I've seen, and if you look at like some of the valuations of other companies that were sold along the same timeline as us, is I think buyers can fall in love with the idea. They can fall in love with the founders and the people behind it. They have a lot of faith in you as a founder in terms of your ability to execute. You conceived of this thing, you've executed up till now, and don't underestimate, the power of you as a founder and the idea itself. Because I think it's so easy to break it. Like the bankers get involved and it's all spreadsheets. It's all, what's the P&L look like? What's your head count? What's your cost? What's the total addressable market? Blah, 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 blah. And yes, again, that stuff matters. But the things that drove our sales, I believe, were just a total love and fascination with the products that we built and a belief that the team could crush it. And
Hmm.
so don't lose sight of that.
Yep. No, it's really sage advice. So, this has been an incredibly insightful look at the mechanics of the modern workplace, a modern media company. But I'd like to shift gears for our rapid fire round, and I'm going to put you in the hot seat. So, quick question number one is you took a full year off, like we talked about earlier, but what's the one habit from your sabbatical that you still protect?
Dinner with my wife every night.
Oh, I love that. That's so important.
Yep,
Mm.
it is. Hmm.
Okay, finish this sentence. The next satisfying media business model will be built on
Say, being indispensable, not interesting.
indispensable and not interesting. Okay. And then the last question is what's the worst piece of advice you keep hearing people give to first time founders?
The worst piece of advice? I'd say I'd say it's like, raise as much as you can as fast as you can. I think that's dangerous. It makes you lazy and fat. There's some that are good at it. I think Semaphore is an example the opposite way. Those guys are, raised a lot and are killing it. But I think it'll help you take your eye off the ball pretty quickly if you've got too much money sitting around the bank.
Yeah, I just was on another podcast with Tim Camp from 1440. Very interesting story, by the
Oh
way.
yeah.
And we talked about that a lot. And it just like you could be valued at 2 billion one day. The market does something, and then you are no longer in business. So, I think that's a great piece of advice. So that's a great note to end on. So, Jay, thank you so much for joining us and for sharing your incredible insights today. And before we close, a reminder to the audience that the conversation doesn't end here. It continues inside Revenue Room CXO, where CEOs and their revenue critical teams come together to tackle growth, transformation, data strategy, organization, and the evolving impact of AI and data on business performance. So if you're interested in joining, I've included the link to learn more in the show notes, as well as the link to connect with Jay on LinkedIn. So thank you so much, and I'll see you next time.